Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets lose their fourth straight at the hands of the Pelicans in blowout fashion and have lost just 2 out of their last 10 games on the winning side of things. We break down what this looks like. How far has the floor fallen out for this team? And does it start to bring up the questions about whether or not Jacque Vaughn's job should, in fact, be in jeopardy?
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, for better or worse, every single day. Over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I am Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, this was a 112-85 blowout loss for the Brooklyn Nets on the road in New Orleans, but they did stave off setting the single season record for lowest point total in a game this year. Other than that, man, there is a lot to dive in here, and it really is pretty bleak from a Nets standpoint.
Yeah, this is bad, man. We talked about it. I talked about it over the last couple episodes after the OKC game, kind of starting to see some of the writing on the wall here. 2-9 over their last 11. The only 2 wins there were sort of like must-win games against a Pistons team that was on a historically bad run. So I'm not even sure we can totally count them. They all count, but I mean that one, you do have to wonder what the situation would have been had those not been sort of like national games. And now, I talked last time about how things could turn around and, possibilities of ways that things could kind of like maybe recenter themselves here. This game went, I can't even say it went the opposite. It went this is the worst possible outcome. This game against the Pelicans is as bad as I've ever seen the team play since we started podcasting. And I'm including games where they completely punted because at least those other guys tried. This game was as bad as you've ever seen, like a basically healthy, full NBA team that like has playoff aspirations or whatever, go out and take a court in the middle of a bad losing streak and a bad run and absolutely and utterly phone it in. Garbage performance all around. And this is as bad as it gets. I hope it's rock bottom because that means there's a way to start pulling out of this. But these are the kinds of games that you sometimes start to see higher level changes come from. Because it's hard to take anything from this game and point to a positive. It's not like this was a one-off where, hey, we were a little, came out a little low tonight. This was a game where they are on a losing streak, have been super bad over many weeks now. And the Pelicans are the ones that look like the team that had everything to play for and all the energy.
Team, right?
I mean, even the energy level was totally different. This team, we might be heading into a territory here of high-level changes. And it's hard to just take anything else away from this game. It was that bad of a loss.
We're going to backtrack into this game specifically and talk about the things that you saw basically from the tip-off that let you know this game was going in a very bad direction very quickly. But you mentioned it. When games like this happen, and quite frankly, when stretches like this happen, because you illustrated on the last episode, all of the things that have been terrible from a stat standpoint for this team across this recent stretch, you don't walk into the locker room and fire players. You do walk into the locker room and fire a head coach. And we're never one to advocate that a coach needs to be or should be fired. But you just mentioned, these are all the recipes. These are all the ingredients that go into a high-level change getting made. And we've already seen Josiah. I mean, frankly, I don't know how high up you could go with this, but we've already seen Josiah have an extensive loyalty to Sean Marks. So you know that if those internal conversations happen, you're going to look to a head coach that has been with this organization for 7 seasons on the staff. Like they've been loyal to him as well. But it is really hard to disconnect the idea of performance on the court and motivation, even on the base level, from the head coach. And just at some point, you do feel like a team starts to tune a coach out, and that we may have reached that place with Jacque Vaughn now.
it's hard to not look at this game and think that, right? Again, when you add in all the other context, they've had bad games. They've had bad games along this run. They've lost by double digits along this run. Like the losing part is not new. It's the how you lose piece that is starting to become very concerning. If you back out the Detroit games, like I said, they've lost by an average of almost 16 points a game during that stretch. Average loss of 16 points a game. Like when they're getting blown out. They're not just losing, they're getting crushed by basically kind of every night now. And to go out and have this performance here where nothing works, the energy level's super low. It looks like they never got off the bench really. You say you can't fire the players, and that's true because, everyone's under contract. At some point, you have to make some kind of change that's going to signal, hey, we understand that things are not going correctly here.
Right.
Vaughn has had, and I've mostly advocated for Vaughn over the time. I think he's a really thoughtful guy. I think that early in the season, we thought the players were playing very hard for him. There was obviously effort stuff. I think over the short term, there's been some curious quotes by him and moves that have been head scratchers. And even for me, who has, like I said, is kind of, I just don't like to see people fired. So maybe if you're into that, you came to the wrong place. But there's been some curious quotes, even, right? Some curious moves. The move to sit out the players against the Bucks. I know that's an organizational decision too. It's not on him. That was a really weird move at the time. It's completely backfired. He had a quote earlier this week that said basically talking about him as a coach and how the team had no all-stars. It's just a weird thing to say because they haven't even picked the all-star.
Referring to talking to his players, like when he tells his kids something.
He
about
referred to the kids as kids. Each one of these things is not necessarily problematic until you kind of take them holistically and look at it. There's just been there's weird stuff going on here. And again, each one of those quotes in a vacuum, whatever, move on. Pile them all together, and it starts to paint a not so amazing picture here. He also had a moment, he said pregame, where he talked about sort of the reason they weren't playing defensively. And it was kind of saying it was because the players wanted to play different defenses. He hinted at this. There's writing on the wall here that this thing has gone completely sideways, and this game seemed to exemplify it.
And it seems to be too, just to kind of drill down on the point of this before we get into this game specifically, and then talk about a much higher level discussion. How bad can a team look to ultimately influence the way the organization thinks about decisions as we look forward to that trade deadline? Jacque Vaughn as well, remember, and it never really came to fruition here, but coming into the season, the idea is we're going to be a gritty team. We're going to grind teams down. Defense is going to be a key cornerstone. You mentioned maybe players just aren't fully capable or willing to buy into whatever system that he's setting forward. But if you have that identity that you've established for your team, and the product on the court tells you that it is not meeting that standard, at some point, Jacque Vaughn also has to look at it and say, I'm sitting down all my veterans, maybe to send the message, right? And I'm going to play all these young guys. They're going to hustle for every minute that they get. But there's also been a struggle there for him from a coaching perspective and a willingness to go to the young players, to develop the young talent. You sit everybody down the other day as rest. Maybe that was an attempt to send some type of message. It obviously did not get home. Coming up here in a second, we're going to go inside this game specifically. What were the things that we saw from the jump that told us it was going to go bad in a hurry? And what were the adjustments that Jacque Vaughn, again, failed to make inside of this game to maybe write a different script? We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. I'll cheer myself up here a little bit talking about my friends at FanDuel. NFL season is wrapping up. Still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app and FanDuel is just so easy too. They got the live same game parlays and just the regular same game parlays as well. You pile all that stuff together. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. That's where you can find the real popular stuff that other people are putting in. So much more: player props, over, unders, lines. It's all there for you on FanDuel. And grab those $150 in bonus bets too, win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we continue the post-game coverage of the Brooklyn Nets falling to the Pelicans, as we know, 112-85, a blowout loss from wire to wire. Before we talk inside of this game, though, one more quote here you have, Doug, from Jacque Vaughn that really, I'm assuming, further illustrates that things are going the wrong way inside this building right now.
Well, this is just part of his post game, but this is one thing he said. This is quoting Vaughn after the game tonight against the Pels: the will to get it done and the will to do your part and get outside of yourself. If you're really desperate about winning, then you dive on the floor, you'll do it all. You get cuts and bruises and you go home sore. We're not there yet. I'm like, okay, again, I'm not one to pick apart these quotes usually because I just think it's mostly silly. Like these guys have to go up and say something. And if you were asked to go in front of a microphone, like we are every day, like you're going to eventually say something wrong. There's just no way around it, right? Like you can't say it all right. It's just, especially
messed up the intro to the show. It happens.
Especially when you grab these guys in their lowest moments, which I'm sure this is. It is this thing, though, with this follows, and I actually saw this quote as I was just going through the other quotes from before that already are on record from earlier in the week after, multiple games. This is another one of those games where it's just like when you say we're not there yet and we're not doing these things, like, hey, you're the coach. Like, you're the coach. Like, this is kind of the job. I'm sorry, it's maybe the whole job, especially when it's an NBA situation. If you're not there yet, it can only actually end up falling one place if that's your reasoning, which he already just said himself that it is. So these are very curious things. And I just wonder if we're, again, like just to reiterate the part where we're starting to see maybe the writing on the wall here. And the Nets also have not been teams that have wanted to make these uncomfortable decisions at times. So that's what makes me feel like it's maybe not going to happen.
And it's a bit of a disconnect too, just also on that of the way that we're hearing Jacque Vaughn talk now, but then the way that he's referred to his veterans, right? When asked questions about late game sequences, why did you have Cam Thomas out, or why did you go with player X and Y? Typically, it's been, well, I just rely on Dorian Finney-Smith there. I trust his veteran experience. Spencer Dinwiddie with the ball in his hand, Mikal Bridges, whoever it may be, right? So it feels like a breaking point has maybe happened here publicly for Jacque Vaughn, where behind closed doors, maybe he was expressing it differently to the team, right? Maybe the messaging was different. But all the way up until this recent run, it's primarily been, I believe and trust these players. Now, all of a sudden, it's turning to, well, we haven't done these things yet. And to your point, well, if not by now, then when? When at some point does the sample size just become who you are, right? This is the type of team you are. And this recent stretch here, the last 12, 13 games, has really been a sample size that's been pretty alarming. Specifically, when we look just inside this Pelicans game here, not that we need to spend a lot of time on it, but I said it now multiple times. From tip-off, effectively, the Nets struggled on switches. They struggled on rotations. They struggled on closing out perimeter shooters. Like that's just defensively specific, because I feel like it's been easy to get away from the fact that the defense was supposed to be a part of this team's core identity. They did not defend anyone in this game. And there were multiple situations where Spencer Dinwiddie was defending a backing down Zion Williamson in the paint. And it's inexcusable. So if you want to say it's execution and they're not following what the coach wants, that's one thing, but something has to look different here. And that was in the first 30 seconds of this game.
Yeah, so this is the other really troubling part for a team is because like sometimes defense is about effort, right? Like it's a lot of scheme for sure, and the scheme has the scheme hasn't seemed to totally show up this year, but it's also an effort thing, right? Like getting into passing lanes, just never losing a guy, right? Being head on a swivel the entire time, just making sure that you're always digging and recovering or whatever it's going to be, stunting, getting back, like all the stuff that goes into defensive connectivity. Like to say it wasn't there is like you said beginning, it was all not there. There was none of it. They get the Dinwiddie on Zion thing, some of that was cross matching, because again, the other problem is the Nets can't make any shots. So when you can't make shots, you can't set your defense. So they get stuck into mini transitions sometimes where they get cross matched to death. That's been a big problem for them. But then even when they were able to set their defense a few times, this is early on. This basically set the tone for the whole game. Early on, they get caught 3 times in trying to bring doubles to the ball, either by confusion or design. Like it was 2 of them were design and 1 was confusion. And they led to 3 completely wide open rhythm 3-pointers. And they were like, it's over. Right?
Yeah,
right. Basically
good night.
But kind of, and it was and those defensive possessions. And the reason I know that is because during the break, I actually went back on the app and rewatched the first 4 possessions just to make sure it wasn't just like bad luck or like good closeouts. It didn't look like it at the time, but just making sure that my eyes were telling me. And it was actually even worse than I thought. And when that's going to be the case, where the defense has been a major issue, you supposedly have the personnel to not to be an above average defense, and you're letting these like just super easy baskets. Because I sometimes don't judge the late game defense. Like when you're down 30,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't think we're gonna do a lot of big takeaways from the defense down 30. But when it's just tipped and you're running into these major problems of scheme and effort kind of all at once, that is a major problem. And those are the possessions that count a little more, because those are the things you draw it up. You're still the game plan's still fresh in your mind and it's still all going wrong. To have it just come out and just have it be worse than imaginable is just so problematic and actually very difficult to see your way out of. Like if you're a fan, if you're a team, like it's difficult to start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, because when it's mistakes in scheme and effort and just like tactics, that's just the triumvirate. Like you can't overcome all three. It's hard to just overcome one.
And even on the defensive end too, there was another sequence there, but because the other side of this is on the offensive end, it's a bad night for a lot of guys, right? We can highlight the fact that you're talking about Mikal Bridges going 4 of 11. It's a really rough night. Thomas doesn't start, but comes in and goes 0 for 11. He cannot find his shot or find his rhythm, which probably, by the way, to go back to the top, can start to bring scrutiny around the decisions that you're making with your lineup and who's starting.
Yeah, but the flip side of that is Dinwiddie was 0 for 6. So it's like, I know these guys always get piled together and who should start. Great news, they both stunk.
Great news. Either way you slice it, it was going to be bad.
Yeah, they were over 19 together. Over 17 together. So whatever, it didn't matter who played.
No, and that's why, offensively, ball doesn't go in. Sometimes it's as easy as that in games like this when you start to look at the box score. But on the defensive end, again, there was also a sequence early in this game where I believe it's Valanciunas that's setting the screen up near the top of the key, and the action is being run for Ingram to basically run a little curl action around the screen being set, and it's for Mikal Bridges to fight over top of that screen and make sure that he picks up Ingram. But what ends up happening, it illustrates, I think, the lack of communication and reaction time. And this one falls on Claxton. It could have fallen on anybody. But as Mikal Bridges goes to fight over top of that screen, all Ingram has to do is stop the curl action, step right back out beyond the arc, and wait for the pass. And it's a wide open 3. Now, Claxton can try to get over there to cover that, but he doesn't. And that's one example in the first 5 minutes of this game that happened time and time again. And it was one of those things, I think, sometimes too, in games like this, when you see that when it feels like it's going to go the wrong way in a hurry, you actually get to watch a lot more stuff that's happening off of the ball. And that, you and I talk about this off the podcast, I think even more than we do on, watch what everyone else is doing away from the basketball to really learn something. When we go to the offensive side, I can tell you the same story again, because when Spencer Dinwiddie is on the ball, when Mikal Bridges is on the ball, look away from it. And you see 4 other guys primarily standing around. Like, I just don't see the off-ball action that you need to have, especially when you're not a team that has the ability to create on-ball in ISO situations, because you don't have the type of players to do so. That being the case, coming up here in a second, we'll maybe give you 1 or 2 more tidbits out of this game, but then really talk about, even beyond Jacque Vaughn, are we at the point of the season where the organization has to start to think about the trade deadline and high-level decisions in a much different way? We'll get into that coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, you're going to the game. You're going to the concert. You're going to the play. You're going to the comedy event. You want the ticket buying experience to be easy. You want to make sure that you're getting the very best price out there. You want to take all the frustration out, keep all the fun in. That is where the Game Time app comes in. They got last minute tickets. They got flash deals. They got zone deals. It's super easy to find and buy tickets for every single kind of event in your area. You're going to be able to see exactly what you're going to see when you sit down in the venue, all there in the app. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. It's all there for you on Game Time. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. Right now on Game Time, I know you probably doesn't, from the sound of it's not going to make you want to do this. There are Nets tickets on sale over there on Game Time. OKC, see your boy SGA get in there, starting at $55 this Friday, January 5th. Also, Blazers at Nets starting at $26. All there for you on Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, so as with Talia Bo on the post-game podcast, the Brooklyn Nets 112-85 on the road, losing to the Pelicans. Obviously, Not the ideal outcome. Obviously, the culmination of what has been a lot of frustration. You don't have to go too far. The fan base was already getting a little edgy. But the interesting thing to me, Doug, coming out of this game is, yes, maybe this is at the point where a change needs to be made, and it could end up being the coach that is always the first to go. But the other conversations heading towards the trade deadline is Donovan Mitchell going to be available? Should the Brooklyn Nets go all in to get him? Because that can, turn this thing around. You add him with Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson and these other players. Okay. I think that this stretch of games and culminating with this loss to the Pelicans, I think it takes all those types of thoughts off the table. And I know that this isn't a one game reaction in reality.
No.
But all of these in succession, and looking at the net ratings and looking at the dysfunction inside of the rotations, not being able to fight in the right combinations, I don't see how the organization can't be having a bit of a wake up call here that suggests we need to be sellers, and maybe sellers on more players than we would have initially been willing to even think about, because we are far further from being a competitive play-in kind of team, pushing into the 8th seedish kind of range. This team is trending towards missing out on the play-in tournament with the type of performances we've seen.
Yeah, I'm worried it goes. There's going to be a crisis of conscience here. I'm actually not sure which direction they should go. It seems to me, I agree with you that they're more than just like one Donovan Mitchell like move away, right? Like that would this stretch would suggest that this is not a team that's like one piece away from getting over like some major hump into like super winning consistent basketball, right? Consistent. Right. I'm not saying they wouldn't have a decent team on a night-to-night basis, but like would that move them based on what they would have to give up to like make any kind of move at this point, combined with like just where their roster is now?
Yeah.
I'm not sure we've seen any evidence over the short term here that suggests that they're anything close. The problem, and this is a big problem, is that might not be where their motivations are. Their motivations might be get people into Barclays, get the ratings up a little bit here, be better. Yep. And if the future has to take another hit to make that happen, then that's okay, because the bottom line is the bottom line now. I'm very worried from a long-term analysis standpoint that they are not going to see this as a, fire sale kind of time. And I'm actually, there's versions of a fire sale I'm not even aligned with either.
Sure.
But like, I just don't know if that's going to be the thought process here. I think the thought process is going to go the other way.
And it's funny you mentioned that too, because guess what? Money really drives a lot of decisions around these types of things, right? It's probably one of the reasons why there was a struggle when it came to it definitely was a reason why they dragged their feet as long as they could on trading Kevin Durant, because they know what it means to be having Kevin Durant on your court for 41 games a year at your home arena. But I'll say for you and me, probably, hopefully. And again, we don't advocate for anyone to be fired. We don't advocate for guys to be traded. And we've always said this about guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, even like Royce O'Neal. We talk about trading them because they're good players and they have really good value for other teams. I actually think that maybe this run of games pushes the needle on those types of decisions, right? Are we going to hold on to Dorian Finney-Smith or Royce O'Neal or both beyond the deadline because we're a competitive team, because we want to go back to the playoffs? Well, a run like this can open your eyes up and say, listen, we may want to do that, but functionally, having Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal isn't going to change the margins on how many people come to Barclays Center. You might be able to make the case Jalen Wilson playing and maybe some Noah Clowney minutes, right? And Tariq Whitehead. That'll actually move the needle a little bit more in those cases. The other high-level guy is probably Nicholas Claxton, right? Because you have that contract discussion looming in the offseason. Those three players, to me, and there's even a couple other ones you could throw in, like a Lonnie Walker, if he gets back healthy and on the court, maybe even a Dennis Smith Jr. Like there are certain players here that I think you should be inspired to discuss with a little more conviction than you would have been 10, 15 games ago.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But I'm just worried that like they're just going to see this as a different thing. I think logically that makes sense. Like I think we've been saying this for a while, is that this team is not close. The long-term goal has to be winning at the highest levels. I'm for floor raising just to be interesting for years. Like I get that point, But the concern, like we said at the beginning here, is that the concern is when you see a game like this, and you see a game like this against the Pelicans, and you see a stretch like this, like they've been on over the last 9, that against like kind of the better teams, right? Like maybe they did some bottom feeding a little bit earlier in the season. I thought they played hard a lot of the games, but if like the life is going out of the team a little bit, and they're just getting kind of just smoked on a nightly basis by the actual good teams in the NBA, like I just wonder, how much work could even be done to make a trade. So I don't know. I think it's very clear, but I just don't like. There's no way the organization sees it the same way. They've never signaled that that's like what they want to do. But like, go back to last year when they could have traded guys at the deadline and gotten probably more value for them. They're like, no, we're making the playoffs. Right.
Okay. And I'm speaking from the side of you and I were 2 individuals that said they should have already traded Dorian Finney-Smith, should have already traded Royce O'Neal. So this feels like it crystallizes it for you and I.
Yeah, of course.
To follow organizational logic, well, if we didn't think it then, why would this necessarily shift our mentality?
I just don't. I think it's going to shift it the other way. I'm worried it's going to shift it the other way, that they're going
to say, what are we missing? What are we missing to really make all these pieces fit together better, as opposed to maybe we don't have nearly what we thought we did.
Yeah, it's like, oh, the Bulls are. I'm not thinking they're going to do this, but like, oh, the Bulls are playing better without Zach LaVine. We'll take him, and if we can get rid of the Simmons contract, right, or something like that. I don't think that's like going to happen. Right. But these are the kind of moves that would be really, really suspect. But you might think, oh, it put some more butts in the seats, and it can get us out of the malaise that we're in, or whatever. Because other than doing that, it's like so hard to see. And I'm not sure this organization, from the owner to the GM and the coach, whoever it's going to end up being, I'm not sure they have like the appetite to embrace the discomfort that comes with a move like getting worse before you get better. Like, that's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable to get worse and have to explain it to ticket holders, and explain it to season ticket holders, and worry about your ratings and look at your team being worse. It's why teams wait too long often. They often wait way too long to do this, because it's so uncomfortable. It's easy for us in the podcast world and fans out there to talk about how easy it would seem. It's a lot harder when you're sitting in the seat that has to answer all the questions about why the team sucks for multiple years. And so it's an unenviable position, but I don't think this team is built to do something really uncomfortable. And I just don't think they are.
And because, oh, by the way, and this will be my last thought as we close out the podcast, and then we'll stick around here, obviously, with everybody who came on the live, which, by the way, they do say misery loves company. And by the looks of it, it in fact does. But the other thing being here, that when we talk about these decisions, and again, we're not advocating for any of the negative outcomes here, but if you are a segment of the fan base that thought they should have moved on from all these players, they should have done this, they should be going all youth, they should have done that to start the season, they should have traded Mikal Bridges, all these players, the second that they got them in the door. The other side of this thing is, if you're the organization, you know how this goes. So you make the tough decisions, right? And you move on from big name players. Well, guess what? When all the young guys are struggling and it's about, well, we're developing the youth and the future is going to be bright, fans don't love watching the Detroit Pistons right now either. It's not like the fan base, it just automatically galvanizes behind, all right, we're pulling in the right direction. That shine wears off even faster than when you feel like you get back great packages for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. That lasted you what? Half a season, effectively. That's how long that good nature lasted among the fan base, and understandably to a certain extent. But here we are. So, it may feel bleak now. The other side of this could be even bleaker. So I know that's a little bit out of both sides of my mouth here, but I've been through it, watching the Brooklyn Nets, watching the New Jersey Nets. When teams are bad, it is bad. And that's a little bit of what this game felt like. Really bottom of the NBA kind of bad. And that isn't something I thought we would see from these players this year.
Yeah, look, we waited for a while to say, is this like rock bottom during the thing? We actually never said things like this. This is the first time we've been doing this podcast for years and years and years now. This is the first kind of tenor we've had around this, because unlike other swoons that they've had in the past, losing streaks, it was like, oh, they're losing right now, but Kevin Durant's back in 2 weeks. Right. Like, oh, they're losing now, but Kyrie's going to be back here. Like it's looking weird now. They just brought in James Harden. Like, there's been things that the team could do to like sort of like get over like a major hump that's much harder to see now. Yep. In this situation, it's a lot harder to see. So we'll chop it up here in YouTube Live. Got a ton of people. Really appreciate everyone here that's come to lament what's happening here with the Brooklyn Nets season. Make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube if you haven't done that yet. We're pushing towards 7,000 subscribers. So let's get there, folks. Make sure you also subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Sometimes you have to make tough decisions to hold the line on spending. Evan Bye.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back tomorrow and in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, 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 basketball. Yeah. Ah, yes, my friends. When the post-game podcast ends, the post-pod podcast begins. We'll be covering everything with you, the fans, chopping it up from not only the most recent games, but also high-level topics, such as, is it time for a fire sale in Brooklyn? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ah, yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrick. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen. We're free on all those great platforms. And, Doug, we kick off the post-pod with really, I think, a question that needs to be asked at this point because the trade deadline looms and because, as we discussed the potential for the Houston Rockets trade, the only version where we would let go of Mikal Bridges, there is a world where it's not just should the Nets hold a fire sale, but could the Nets actually come out on the winning side of making some really fire sale type decisions, specifically around Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson? I can paint quite an interesting picture.
I mean, you're not going to trade Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson in the short term and get better, almost for sure, right? Mm-hmm. I think just with who you'd probably be bringing in, I just don't think that that's a reasonable scenario, even though Bridges has been terrible. Terrible relative to what we thought he was going to be, right? Like he's kind of back sort of to just Phoenix Suns. Mikal Bridges,
right.
Not
which,
the
by
guy
the way, means he still is desirable by teams that view him in the same way that he was viewed coming out of Phoenix, right?
One would think, but I mean, clearly you would have to think the trade value is lower now than it sat, on the last day of the last season, or even, a few weeks ago. It's probably, I don't think front offices don't overreact like sometimes, we do or whatever. So I think that it wouldn't have dropped precipitously now, but you do have to believe it's hard to see him as a top 50 player right now, the way that he's playing. It's been a really, really rough stretch for him. So you're not going to get better by trading Bridges and Cam Johnson in the short term, really, to anyone. The question just becomes sort of who would be interested in these guys, and how, like we said on the last bit here, is how uncomfortable you're willing to get as a team. And that's hard. And so I'm sure there's scenarios. We could talk Donovan Mitchell, I guess, but I have a comment about him specifically, but yeah, no, this is they're in an incredibly tough spot right now.
Yeah, well, for me personally, I'll do this just to illustrate the idea of a fire sale and what that looks like. And it isn't even going all the way down to Nicholas Claxton's or others. Who knows how you want to really talk about that from an every single player standpoint. But I'll include the two players that we discussed, Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, guys we feel like they should have moved on almost regardless of how the team was going, and then Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson. So we've illustrated the Mikal Bridges to Houston before. Let's get back control of some of our draft capital. So you get back 3 firsts that you control of your own picks from Houston. Okay, great. And in the process, you grab yourself a couple of young players. Maybe it's an Eason, maybe it's a Green. You can mix and match those. You go to the Lakers, and the rumors have been out there that they're interested in Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal as potential fits for their roster. It's not hard to give them both those players, grab a first-round pick, grab a Hood Schifino, make some salary matches. And then the last piece you do is you go to Detroit, who is looking into Cameron Johnson in the offseason, a floor spacer to help that young team grow. Okay, great. We'll take a look at a couple of young players that you maybe have in your roster. Maybe it's just taking a Weissman to have the salary dump at the end of the season, but you get back a couple of first-round picks on him. That expires at the end of the year, Doug. At the end of all this, though, the Nets end up with control of their own first-round picks and another, in totality, with those included, 7 or 8 first-round picks. And then you have a few more young players to look at. You have your own young players to develop. It doesn't project as being a high-winning team in the short term, but it does project in I think the OKC model of having a lot of draft capital, control of your own stuff, and the ability to kind of dictate your own future, which, as we've always said, the Nets just don't have right now.
Yeah, so we put out this Mikal Bridges thing. Like we talked about it online weeks ago, and then did a podcast about it recently. I will say the one piece of this has changed for me. It's got nothing to do with whether I would want the Nets to do it. I actually think that it would be the move to do. I actually worry now that if the Rock, even if it at the very probably slim chances even had to like actually even happen, right? Is that if the Rockets look at this situation and they're like, this might just be a good pick. Right, the way the Nets are playing right now, like that just could be a lottery pick, and we don't even have to give anything up because right now, I mean, following this game, Nets are 15-19, ninth in the East. It's really tough to see them like winning multiple playing games at this point. Look, the season's long, multiple things can happen, right? These things change so quickly, but you could reach a point where you're discussing stuff with Houston, even if it was realistic, maybe not, and they're like, I don't know. That pick just might be good, right? And next year's pick might be good because it's hard to see your way out of this.
It's the same way that we were talking about Nets looking at Phoenix and going, oh, well, all of a sudden those Phoenix picks, they could get juicier a lot sooner than we thought because of the injuries and the dysfunction and what have you. So there is that part of this too, where you're like, Houston goes, we'll see. Let's just see what happens.
I mean, they might
just hard choice first, Brooklyn, not us, right?
Yeah, right. And so this is the problem. This is the crisis the Nets are in right now. And from a team building crisis, I'm being serious about the word crisis. Like this is a crisis. Like they have a bad problem here. They have a bad problem that the team in the so far 34 games in. No, add in how they played early in the year. Just take the 34 game sample. The 34 games in, they're 15-19. That's just where they are. So like take they're 4 games under 500. They have no top end talent at all. They have almost no way to get it short of just, shipping off picks that they have, like that they, these other teams picks, these Suns picks and the Mavs picks and stuff like that. They have like this is a bad situation. Like this is a this is a real rough one because there are so few ways out of this right now that aren't just, essentially the equivalent of just bailing water out of the boat with a bucket that's too small. Right. Like they just can't, and you'll never be able to catch up. And that's like the problem. They're really staring down this problem right now.
It feels a little bit like they're in this mode of either go all in, quote unquote, or go all out. And either decision isn't going to feel any better or worse. It's all potentially bad here. In a second, let's illustrate that all in and also get into all the fan questions here as we come out of this bad 112-85 loss to the Pelicans. We'll get to that in just 1 second.
All right, one more time to make myself feel better. The NFL season is wrapping up. Still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because new customers over on FanDuel right now, reminder, all you got to do is place a $5 bet. You can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. That $5 real money bet goes in. Win or lose, you're grabbing $150 in bonus bets that you can use on everything on the site. Live same game parlays. You can find bets in the Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. You can find what other people are parlaying together as well. It's all there for you on FanDuel. All you do is go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we continue with the post-pod podcast, fire sale, anyone? No, we don't want to totally do that. But the other thing that I think comes out of this stretch of games, Doug, is we'll get into the comments at Locked On Nets. We already have a few ready to go here, including ones like these from Hamilton Santos. Doug's too happy. Yep, he said that right off the bat, right at the start of the podcast. He said, "What's this guy doing?
Too happy,
having too much fun." The bottom line is that
not happy.
The Brooklyn Nets, the one thing that I want to add into it was the other idea was, well, trade for Donovan Mitchell. And we already know that the Cavs don't seem like they're really going to move him, but people mention go for Markkanen. Well, by the way, we've heard from the Jazz now that they're talking about setting the same kind of haul that they want to get back when they traded Gobert, 5 first-rounders. Like there's really lofty price tags being put on them. So the other problem here, I think, about this stretch is, to your point about a difficult spot for the organization, we don't look good enough on the court to suggest that adding a Donovan Mitchell is what's that going to do? Like save us, keep us as a play-in team, make us a first-round exit team? You can't make those kind of decisions and sacrifice that trying to draft capital in the short term when the sample of what you have right now is not good enough to warrant making that move, right? Like we entertain those discussions, even though you and I said we wouldn't do it. we entertain those because the team is a game or two above 500, because they're in the right kind of spot here, because they can get over top of a couple of teams. In the last 10 games, every team that was slightly behind them has gotten over top of them. They all look stronger, and the Nets continue to look weaker and weaker.
That's the other problem too. When you look around the East about who might be buyers and who might be sellers, the list of buyers gets longer.
Yeah,
because the Nets are worse.
Yep.
Like if you do the math, right? It's like the more the Nets drop in the standings in the East, another team can just go up and replace them. That might not feel like they need to start selling because they can start looking at a team that they can beat in the standings. You know, the Bulls are probably looking at this way. The Hawks are probably looking at them this way. Heck, even the Raptors, right? Like the Raptors now, bring in RJ, bring in IQ, pair him with Siakam. We'll see what they already said. They're like, we're going to wait a month and see how this works.
Yep.
They've said it. Like they're like, we're going to see a month and see how this works. And if it works together, then maybe Siakam gets re-signed. Like, right. You don't know. This is what I mean about like sort of like sometimes one team like the Nets is not going to shift the landscape, but will make some of these other teams in the same range look a little different about their situation because they know they're just one less team to sort of fight with. And this is a problem here. I do not think the Cavs are going to trade Donovan Mitchell, by the way. I know that's a name that gets, it really only feels like it's talked about in Nets world. Like I don't see that.
Right. Because you want it because you need it. So
of course. But like just one more note about this, and we'll get into some of these comments about Spider, is that that starting lineup, because of injuries, has played something like 150 minutes total together. The team that they drew up would bring in Strus as a stretch 3, like they could kind of space, the kind of the one guy they needed last year. Okoro's looked a lot better. Like they just haven't played enough minutes together to sell it off, and he's still in their contract for another year. I just don't see it. And even if they did, I actually don't think the Nets offer is attractive enough for guys that they would want to reset the deck with. So I just don't think it lines up at all, actually, for the Nets.
And honestly, by the way, they're 5-3 over their last 8 games, and they play the Wizards next to the Cavaliers. So
that's without Garland and Mobley, who Garland broke his face, and Mobley had surgery on his knee. They're both due back in a few weeks here. Like they're not gonna punt on it.
If anything, it's the other way. It's the Cavs might be looking at the Nets and saying, a Royce O'Neal, a Dorian Finney-Smith, maybe there's a piece here that we could add to help continue to make ourselves a competitive team this year, because their record and where they are right now at 18-15 in the East, like these are the kind of teams that are going to be saying, okay, what's a margin move we can make here to continue to keep ourselves in that conversation? The Nets are fading away from being able to say we need to make a big ad, even a marginal ad, I should say as well. Hey, blah, what have we done to suffer this much? Listen, man, you grow up where you grow up. Your parents put the wrong hat on you when you were a child. I don't know what to tell you. Listen, I grew up in New Jersey. That was my mistake. I should have been born in LA. I'm pretty sure would have been the ideal spot, or maybe Boston. But we live with the pain that we have given ourselves here to this point. Here's another one from Cart. JV coached in Orlando 10 years ago, and they said he had a bad team, so that wasn't a clear indication of his coaching. Now we know the truth. They had a bad coach. I still think that Orlando was a bad team back then, but it can also just be true that Jacque Vaughn may be more destined to be on a staff as opposed to leading a staff. You hear this all the time. Like some NBA coaches and NFL sees this a lot, coordinators. Hey, I can focus on one aspect of a team, but when you give me the entire reign, it just becomes more things to juggle. And I would say to this point, the sample size suggests that Jacque Vaughn does not maximize the talent that he has on his roster, because I don't think this team is as bad as it's performed of late.
The worst mistake they made with Vaughn, who I've enjoyed listening to. Again, I said it earlier in the podcast. I think he's a thoughtful guy. Yeah. I think he gives really thoughtful answers. I think it's not for lack of thinking about this or whatever, right? I don't think
he's a way better head coach than you are for Nets fans, right? He's not, same we talk about players.
I think the mistake, and we said this at the time too, it was confusing, that when they signed him, they extended him right away for 3 years. That was always a head scratching move to me. Yep. It just didn't make sense to tie yourself with the organization in such flux. You just did not know where this was going. You were just out of this major disaster zone. That's why they did it, right? They wanted to lend stability to the organization after a time of deep instability.
Yeah.
But extending him out 3 years, I'm worried also that is going to end up being throwing good money after bad, because they're going to look at the contract and say, if they want, even if they wanted to move on, let's say they don't want to because they have more years on the contract. Another problem here, we didn't mention this before. I think we've mentioned this on other podcast. I know we've been mentioned on other podcasts, is that if Sean Marks were to fire Vaughn, that would be his fourth coach. I just like there's not GM that would be his. No, he'd be moving into his fourth coach. Most GMs don't get four cracks at the coaching carousel.
But most don't get 3. So from that standpoint,
most don't get 3. Like most don't get 3.
Don't get 2.
Almost you don't get 4. Like you don't get 4. Like at some point you hired the wrong guys. Like you had Atkinson, maybe he was the right guy, but you let him go because you wanted to get a big name in, and you brought in Nash, and you let the other guys in the room make a decision for you, right? Like, okay, well, that's a problem. That's your fault. 2, you fire Nash, which probably was the right thing to do. Definitely was the right thing to do at the time. And you hire Vaughn, fine. But
you extend him.
What's that?
But you extend them, so you
extend them, and so I just don't. I'm worried that actually that's going to factor into the decision. I'm not even saying yes or no they should fire him. I'm just saying that if you got to the point where you thought you should and you didn't because of the other extension, that's problematic also.
And that's the issue around. It's the same thing with. I'm not again whether they should or they shouldn't have. When you traded Kevin Durant, you got McHale and you got Cameron Johnson. At the time, you could say, hey, 4 more picks from the Grizzlies reported for McHale, right? Maybe some value for Cameron Johnson. You can make that choice in the moment. You don't for maybe the right reasons at the time, but now here you are, and you don't feel like you can make that different decision now, right? Jacque Vaughn, you put him in there after you let go of Steve Nash, stability. He had been with the organization. It makes sense at the moment, but now you're overcommitted to the point where maybe now you don't feel like you can make the right choice, right? And it is an interesting spot. And from a Sean Marks perspective or from a Joe Tsai perspective, I guess that the owner and GM are just on the same page for better or worse, that it feels like decisions get made through them collectively so that Sean Marks is secure because Joe Tsai probably feels like, well, if I fire Sean Marks, I'm saying that I made the wrong decision. And he doesn't want to acknowledge that he made the wrong choice, right? We made Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving didn't work out. Well, there's a lot of reasons why that didn't go our way. Here's our new set of ideas about how we want to approach it. That doesn't work out. Well, here's some reasons for that. We were stuck with Ben Simmons through the James Harden trade because that didn't work out, right? You can tell yourself a story that makes it feel like a lot of bad luck has befallen us. But if we can just get ourselves back to stability, we can start to be the team that we envisioned being when I took this organization over.
And it's just gonna be a tough sell. And actually tonight, we got a few more questions or a few more comments here, but tonight's one of the first nights. If you kind of see some of the comments by Nets media, I'm not gonna go through all this right now, but if you look at some comments by entrenched Nets media, that we are friends with and we know, and that this is the first time I've seen these ideas floated too, right? That changes need to come, and those just don't always come from nowhere too. This is the first time where I've seen sort of a collective among the people that speak about this team on a professional level that have kind of started to say, sort of like we're doing tonight for the first time, which is these are the low points that sometimes you see a move made. So I don't just think we're on an island here. And by the way, I'm not saying, again, I know there's people out there that have been calling for this forever, and it's always egregiously silly to me. Like everyone that wants everyone fired all the time, get rid of everybody. And if you're one of those people, just I don't know, there's better ways to spend your life. But I'm just saying, it's easy to see the writing on the wall from this particular game that we could be headed this direction.
And by the way, we won't do it on this episode of the bonus, but we will have to talk about what does that look like if they let go of Jacque Vaughn? You have someone like Ronnie Burrell. You have a lot of young players. You have Kevin Ollie as well on your coaching staff. You have a lot of young members and guys, specifically in Burrell, that coach the G League players, coached a lot of these young guys that you have on your roster, and has done a lot of development in that regard. So you have some in-house candidates, but then who are the outside candidates that could make sense potentially for this team? Jonathan, frequent flyer, with us. Both the Lakers and Mavs are desperate need of reinforcements, and both Royce and Doe are coveted by them. Can a 3-team deal between them and Brooklyn get back the assets? Yeah, I mean, I think any of these two, I will also acknowledge when you talk about moving any type of players, I think a third team sometimes becomes almost logical because there's money that has to move. The Nets maybe want to also find a way to get themselves off of a contract. If money has to, so for example, the Lakers, Gabe Vincent's the name that gets thrown out there. He makes a little over $10 million, helps to make money match. Well, the Nets don't want a 3-year contract on their books. So a third team helps facilitate that. Putting those 3 teams together probably gets a little bit trickier because both the Lakers and the Mavs will be looking to dump something, and they'll be looking to dump it on Brooklyn. If you can live with it for 1 year, it's okay. But I think ideally you want to try to find a way to mitigate taking on, older contracts, mid-veteran contracts, and keep yourself clean immediately going into the next offseason.
Yeah, a couple more here. Several players, this Nader, several players tonight look like they'd rather be anywhere else. You think JV lost the locker room? I actually never thought this until tonight. And I thought this before this. We mentioned this earlier in the podcast. This is the first time I thought like the energy level and the overall body language, which I think people can read way too much into often. So like but tonight I did think like, oh, this is just a weird vibe going on. We mentioned earlier in the podcast about some weird quotes that have come out from him recently. The Bucks thing.
Yep.
I'm still on the page of the Bucks, the resting the Bucks thing. That's an organizational decision. I do not think that would just be a Jacque Vaughn thing. Like that's a thing that's made with everybody in mind. GM to Vaughn down to the trainers. Like I think that like when you make a decision to rest everybody like they did against the Bucks, that's not just one dude sitting in an office and then going and telling anybody. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm like 99% positive about that. But yes, body language, energy, all the stuff, plus some of these quotes that have come out this week. I just think the whole situation is super weird and troubling. And I actually wonder if we're like one game, like if they go out and get completely rolled by Houston tomorrow, like I actually do wonder if that would be it. If they, if they went into Houston tomorrow night or tonight when you're listening and lost by 25 again, I actually wonder how you bring him back to Barclays.
Yeah,
right?
The blowout
like,
losses of the blowout losses of this nature, like tonight's game against the Pelicans, they start to stack up. Like they start to count for more than one in the loss column, right? Like,
and remember too, like this is not just a one game blowout. Like I'll go through real quick. They lose by so they lose by 27 to the Pels tonight. They lost by 16 to OKC. Lost by 6 to the Wizards, who completely suck. And they lost. They lost.
That's not a moral victory.
A moral victory? No, I mean that's like
losing by 6
I mean
to
that's
the
like
Wizards
getting losing by 6 to the Wizards is like getting crushed by a good team.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So,
yes.
Right. So 22 lose by 22 to the Bucks. I don't think the Detroit games really count. So like whatever. Lose by 5 to Denver. 19 to the Knicks. 17 to the Jazz, who also completely stink.
Yeah.
4 to Golden State. 23 to Denver. I mean, that is as bad as it gets. That is double-digit losses on the regular, losses to bad teams in there. Just doesn't get worse for a stretch of 12 games or whatever in the NBA.
Right. So before we hit this one that is lineup related, I'm just going to throw this one up here quickly because we were talking about the Lakers and saying 3D boxing here. Johnson to the Lakers, bring back D'Lo. Whether or not you like D'Lo or not, I personally would not want to bring him back. But this is like just a good reminder when you're looking at trades like this. Go look at what the contracts are. Go look at what that's going to mean. D'Angelo Russell has 2 years left and then a player option on the 3rd year. You do not, and he will be picking that up. You do not want to have D'Angelo Russell with a player option on your team. So it's not just the money matching.
For the Lakers. He doesn't even start for the Lakers anymore.
That's what I mean. It's not even the money matching or the idea of, even in that instance, of like bring back those vibes. Remember the vibes when, right? That's another big reminder here too. The pre-superstar era for the Brooklyn Nets, which had Spencer Dinwiddie and D'Angelo Russell, those guys were all 5 years younger, 6 years younger. Like there was also an energy and a vibe around those players then that doesn't exist now for them. And that's different too.
Can I say one more thing about that too? Because maybe that we'll do this on our podcast too. So I'll make it this relatively short. The other horrible thing with this is we've many times gone and seen these games that the Nets have played where other teams who are much better ice in my mouth are much better. Adam hates
it. So hot about it, he had to cool himself off first.
Adam hates it because I chew ice, but I try to mute myself, but I just couldn't get this thought out in time. All right, I spit it out. So we see like this other, like the Pelicans are out there running like Dyson Daniels out there and Jordan Hawkins along with their rotation players, even though they're a good team. They're out there playing these young guys,
yes,
and getting them like quality rotation minutes while their veterans and good players play, and they're a good team. The Nets don't even do that. Yeah. Like they only play the veterans. You never see anybody else. No one gets developed. Like their rookies have played the least in the whole NBA. Top first round draft picks. The Clowney and Derek Whitehead have played the least minutes, except for like Kobe Buffkin maybe or something. It was like one other guy of the whole NBA in terms of minutes. So you go in all these other games. Like you see Strouder, you see Perry Watts, like you see all these guys from Denver. That all these guys end up playing. They're young guys. They don't even do that. They're not even playing the young guys. So it's like it's the worst of all worlds. Lose all the games and don't develop the young guys. So it doesn't make any sense.
And that's why the last question that we'll do here, which comes in talking about should Cam Thomas go back to the starting lineup. We'll address that in a second.
I'm fired up.
But kind of to your point here. Now, you and I we agreed on like a guy like Noah Clowney. We both agreed, it's gonna be a ways down the line. Jariq Whitehead, he's gonna take time to get back from the injury, but then when he's ready, I don't know if you would agree or disagree about this 15 games ago versus now in terms of developing those players because they're playing in the G League, or a Jalen Wilson. Like, I think maybe I was a little bit, more advocating for him to get in there. He should. I talked about this. If after the trade deadline, Jalen Wilson is not playing somewhat significant minutes for the Brooklyn Nets, something has gone wrong in the decision-making process. But it is just alarming. And then you bring in all the young players that you've brought in this offseason. And none of those guys are playing really that much either for you. Trendon Watford has shown you enough to suggest he should be a consistent, even on a small scale, consistent member of the rotation. But you don't do that. You're waiting for Lonnie Walker to come back from injury. Dennis Smith Jr., yeah, he certainly has. But Dennis Smith Jr., for as young as he is a 7-year veteran of the NBA. So you're just diminishing the value that you're supposed to extract from a season like this. Be kind of exciting. Play some gritty games. Maybe win more than people expect you to. But by the end of it, be able to display all of the value you created in developing your young talent. There's still another half of season to go here plus. And I do think we'll look back and see those guys having played more by the end of it. But I would have expected them to be.
I'm not confident about that. They've not signaled at all that they ever want to do that.
Well, if they don't, you want to be fired up? If they don't do that, I'll tell you what. The post-trade deadline on this podcast is going to be very interesting, depending on what the Brooklyn Nets do for sure.
They just not. This is another thing they've never signaled. They've never signaled with Vaughn that they want to play anybody young at all, except for the stupid game against the Bucks, which they never should have done. Which is that's a team that needed every single win, and they just completely punt the game. By the way, I follow this every single night for every team in the NBA. Teams really just don't do that anymore. Like, some teams will rest guys.
Like, for instance, they don't bury players.
Well, guess what? Well, they're the good teams, or they're like completely tanking. But even the tanking teams don't do it too much. They play their guys like 24 minutes. So like, there's two versions of this in the NBA going on right now. There's the version like that happens with the Spurs and the Jazz, where it's like the guys mostly play the games, but no one runs 35 minutes, right? Like, everyone plays sort of 30 and below. Jordan Clarkson comes in off the bench, right? Like, Wembanyama's on a minutes limit. Right. Like, those are the bad teams. Everyone kind of agrees. Handshake agreement. You're allowed to be bad. Nobody cares. Right. That's the one version. The other version is teams like the Celtics, let's say, who do rest their guys. But guess what? They still win. So, like, whatever. So, like, they rest Kristaps. He doesn't play back-to-backs. Great news. They go out there and they still crush teams. So
it's a lot easier to say, don't give me your questions about what decisions we make, because we win a lot of basketball games.
Exactly. So or like the Heat or whatever. It's like, hey, guess what? We still win. So whatever. So the Nets are worse. Like, Nets need to win every game, and then they just go out and we're gonna rest our guys. We'll get crushed. Actually had a chance to win. Doesn't matter. Young guys, you go out there. Total disaster. Total mess.
And by the way,
almost definitely gonna get fined by the league, because it's like right in the rules of what they don't want to have happen, and they did it. And so it's just like this whole thing. It's not where the problem started, but it exemplifies what some of the problems are.
And also created some type of friction with Mikal Bridges, who didn't love it.
Yes.
He didn't love that everybody else was sat down. He didn't love that he was able to keep his quote streak going, but also was mitigated in terms of the minutes he was able to play. It's like you get a guy like that in a trade who is everything that you philosophically say you want your organization to be built on, and then you turn around and tell him, well, yeah, but not tonight. And I think that's a really hard message to send. So it does become fascinating. Just to make sure we covered it, yes, we both think that Cam Thomas should be in the starting lineup. We've laid out different scenarios of what rotation should look like. I don't think we fundamentally agree about Spencer Dinwiddie being the problem of this team, but those two players can't coexist together. So you got to do something different. And right now, you are mitigating what Cam Thomas is able to accomplish and develop still as a young player. And oh, by the way, I'll put this in as my last thought. I am not convinced that Cam Thomas is not playing as much because he is not maybe a part of the trade conversations that they're having internally, if they're going to maybe make what I think would be the wrong move, over committing to try to add a star to this roster right now.
All right. Maybe more questions and answers with this Nets team. We've been at it here. Really appreciate everyone that jumped in. Nothing unites a fan base like getting crushed out in there in New Orleans. So sometimes that's what it takes to bring everyone together. And don't worry, folks, got a Ben Simmons update. Almost playing 2-on-2. So maybe just a few more weeks the few more weeks that
That's
have
why we
that
didn't make any trades because Ben's
I mean,
coming back.
I mean, the Ben Simmons thing's hilarious, and not because of him. He's hurt. I get it, but just like the treatment of the reporting around the timeline is so funny, because he's been out like 6 weeks, but we're on the every 2 week plan with the update.
The Brooklyn Nets are excited to announce a press conference where they will discuss the next update regarding Ben Simmons' next potential update. I mean, it's just it is circusy at this point.
Ben, ramp up Simmons. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Much appreciated everyone that jumped in. I'm gonna get KNE had the ramp up in there as a comment, so I'm not gonna say I took it from him. We give you props here. I'll throw it up here real quick. He said the ramp up. That's all right. We're gonna get out of here. Much appreciated, everyone.
I'm sorry.
Hey, look, here's the deal, though. Here's the deal. This is the good news. I'm gonna leave you on good news. Doesn't matter what happens with the Nets. We love talking about the Nets. We are gonna be here every single day, 5 days a week.
And we're psychotic.
Talking logically about this team. Not gonna whine about it. We're not gonna just sit here and whine about how bad and whatever. We're gonna talk logically about things they can do, ways they can get better, things that should happen. We'll keep looking at the numbers. That's what we're going to do all season long, and that's what you can count on. So it doesn't matter win or lose. Adam and I are going to still do. We're going to bring the same kind of stuff every single day to the Nets discussion. That you can know for sure. You can make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. If you get us close to 7,000 or get us over 7,000 subscribers there, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast as well.
Oh my God, we're having a fire sale. Oh, the burning. It burns me. Evacuate all the school children. This isn't a fever. I can't even see where the knob is. Zing. Tobias Fumke.
One of the all-time great poets. I put the glasses on so I can't see all the fire that we're spewing. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.